Follow me. Right, so today I'm going to talk about my talk that is Nationalism, Tourism and Global Capitalism. In fact, I'm not sure that I am going to arrive to the last point, this global capitalism. I'm going to be based mainly in nationalism and tourism. The main points of my lecture today will be first to talk about connections, connecting all these different lines, personal interest, my personal interest in the topic. I'm going to make some questions and I hope that I will be able to answer later. Then we will briefly go into the pre-modern interest in antiquities and traveling. Then I will move on from the Renaissance to the early modern period, and I will finish. I think that I won't have time to go further with the 19th century. So, connections. And my initial question here, although I will give more questions later, is can we separate off the history of tourism to that of the history of the discipline of archaeology? So until now, you find books on the history of archaeology and books on the history of tourism. And they are two separate worlds. There's nothing that puts them together. And what I'm going to try to do today, and I'm trying to do in a book, is connecting nationalism, colonialism, and leisure. So three ideologies, and connecting them to the history of tourism and to the history of archaeology. Right. My personal interest in the topic is to give you some introduction to my thought, the way in which I have arrived to this point. I started to be interested in nationalism, and probably because of the time I lived in the transition from dictatorship to democracy in Spain and all the re-emergence of nationalisms in Spain. And I got interested into that, and I edited a book on nationalism and archaeology in Europe that was published long ago, 20 years ago now. Then I have written something else on a world history of 19th century archaeology based on nationalism, colonialism, and so on. But I mean, I'm not the only one. There are many other books. And in the 90s and early 2000s, there were many people working on that. There has also been some work on colonialism. As I said, in that book in 2007, I also talked about colonialism, but there are many other authors that have been working on the relationship between the history of archaeology and colonialism. But there isn't much done on the history of archaeological tourism. And years ago, I had a student in Durham, and when he came to me to say, I want to do a PhD on nationalism and archaeology in Mexico, I said, look, if you do that, you could do that in Mexico. You don't need to come to Durham to do a PhD, a doctoral thesis, on nationalism and archaeology in Mexico. What you can do is try to look at it from a complete different way. Why don't you see whether the development of archaeological tourism in Mexico has affected the development of archaeology? And he started to work, and he wrote his PhD, his doctoral thesis, went back to Mexico. He works now in the National University of Mexico, in the UNAM, and he organized a book, a journal, a dossier, okay, a special issue, and he invited me, and I wrote this article on tourism and archaeology, a historical overview on this silent relationship. And it is published in Spanish. If you want to, it is on the web. It's in my Academia Edu page. And I realized that not many people had provided that overview that I had given there. So that's why I'm writing a book. So I'm expanding that article into something else. So I've been interested in all these things that I am going to talk to you about for the last 20 years. Sounds horrible. Okay, 20 years. So my questions would be, what is the relationship between archaeology and tourism throughout modern history? Modern history, modern in English means contemporary, but, you know, sort of modern and contemporary both, okay? Which in Spanish we would call historia contemporánea. Historia moderna, historia contemporánea. Is there a connection between nationalism and archaeological tourism? Is there a connection between colonialism and archaeological tourism? And has globalization affected archaeological tourism and the archaeological profession? And is this last question the one that I think I'm not going to answer fully today? But I hope that I will be able to do some of them at least. So, but when I started to read, and when you go to some of the handbooks on the history of tourism, you find that people start talking about, you know, antiquity. And I said, archaeological tourism in antiquity. Right, so I'm going to start there, and I'm going to tell you what it's about. So the history, the antiquities first. When is an interest in antiquity? When did it emerge? And what we can say is that even in prehistory, we can see that there is some interest in the past. So we see that megaliths are located in areas where there had been something else before that. So it's this mnemonic quality, is they are memories of something that has happened before. So even in prehistory, we can see that antiquity, the past, has got some importance. It's not always so. In some cases it happens, in some societies, but in some others, antiquity was not really regarded. Okay, in some cases it is. We find, we have in some tombs that maybe 7th century BC, we find things that were created in the 12th century BC. So these, which in Spanish we would call reliquias, we find them in proto-historical times. So the past has importance. There's some mnemonic qualities, but we find them, some of the classical authors that you probably know better than I do, because I am a prehistorian, like Herodotus. He, for example, explained about Babylon, square in shape, with each side of 14 miles long, a total of 56 miles. Babylon is not only of enormous size, it has a splendor such as no other city we have all seen, and so on and so forth. So we see that there is some description of antiquities during the classical Greek period, and that he's traveling around. But can we call that archaeological tourism? Well, it depends how we defined archaeological tourism. So it is true that at this time there were travels, some people traveling around the world or around the known world at the time, and that they were writing, and some other people were going with their writings to see the places. So, and we find a similar thing during the Roman period. And we have here younger Pliny. We travel long roads and cross the water to see what we disregard when it is under our eyes. This is very typical. So you are now in Padua. It's most likely that you go to another place. You go to Barcelona and spend several days looking at museums and so on. Perhaps in Barcelona is the beach, but anyway, you go to Toledo and you go and see all the monuments and so on, but perhaps you haven't gone to the places in Padua. So that's what Pliny the Young is saying. This is what people do. We travel long roads and cross the water to see what we disregard when it is under our eyes. This is either because nature has so arranged things that we go after what is far off and remain indifferent to what is nearby, or because any desire loses its intensity by being easily satisfied, and so on. So there is this description of what a tourist usually does. Okay. So it is clear, if we see the Roman world, that antiquity for them, past things for them were important. So we have many examples of how the Romans are using the past, and are using the past usually in order to display power. So half of the obelisks, Egyptian obelisks, are in Rome, okay? They are not in Egypt anymore, and they are in Rome because they were brought by the Romans. And if they were brought by the Romans to Rome, was because these obelisks had a meaning and they were a representation of power. So the importance of the past is there. And if we then have a look at whether this was considered important enough for people to travel, we can see, okay, if we go to Pausanias, there is this sort of guidebook to Greece in which he describes antiquities in Rome. So antiquities are important enough for people, for someone to write about them, and for people to go and visit them. This doesn't happen in every society in the world. In order to do that, you need that all these things are important for your society. Why? And the reason is the meaning that all these antiquities have, and the meaning of power, the meaning of the importance of the past. It doesn't happen in every society, but it certainly happened in Greece and it happened in Rome. However, what we don't find is the development of an archaeological profession at the time. So it didn't go that far. It was the importance of antiquity, and there were things happening, but what we don't have is the development that we are going to see in the 19th century. And I will try to explain why. Okay. So then we reach the Middle Ages. I'm jumping here, and you know much more than I do about the Middle Ages, but the discourse, the narrative about the past changes. In Italy, it's a bit of a strange place because antiquities were everywhere, and I don't quite understand many times what is happening here in Italy. But elsewhere, it is very clear that the narrative has been substituted. It is not the narrative of the past. It is the narrative of the Bible. And it is the Bible that it is really organizing everything. It also organizes traveling. So what is the traveling in the Middle Ages? You have the pilgrimages. So pilgrims going to Santiago de Compostela, wherever, okay? You find travel is connected to religion, and travel is related then to commerce and so on. Yes, we do have Marco Polo, and there are some times when the past is important. For example, if we go to Charlemagne, Carlo Magno, he gave importance to antiquity. So there are exceptions in the Middle Ages, but at least in most of Europe, the language of antiquity is forgotten. Is the language of the Bible that is important. So what we don't find is, we have this cabinet of curiosities in some churches. So some churches have collections, and collections of strange things. And some of these things are antiquities. But, it's not an important bit of those cabinets of curiosities. Can you follow me? Yeah. Okay. If we go to the Renaissance, and again, you are in the country where really you know a lot about this, the language changes completely. Again. And what we find is in the late medieval period, there has been this increase in towns, and the economy is changing, and so on. So what we find is that there is a substitution of the language of the Bible by, again, the language of antiquity. Why? And what we have to find, to understand, is that there is a change in the political, there is a political change. So if we had that in the medieval period, you had the importance of the church, we are going now to the importance of the monarchy, of the aristocrats and the monarchy. And this new political elites need a new language that substitutes that of the Bible. And by adopting this new language, the language of antiquity, then they are able to to contextualize what they are doing in a complete different way. So that means that, that it has an effect in architecture, in painting, in sculpture, in going back to antiquity, recovering all the classics, and so on. And this affects the way in which antiquity is perceived again. So what we find is that the cabinets of curiosities leave churches and go into private houses. They go to the private houses of aristocrats or the monarchy. Or even you can say, okay, the church, if you can say the Vatican. The Vatican has a huge cabinet of curiosities, and And why, you would say? In fact, because the popes came from the aristocrats. So once the language is imposed, once the new language is imposed, it also creeps back into the church, because those in the elites in the church hierarchy come from the aristocracy. So it's a new, it is a new language. It is a new way of looking at antiquities. We find then that the cabinets have gone from churches to private houses, and we find some, especially aristocrats, moving around, going to all these private collections to see all these private collections and so on. And we also see the first books in which antiquities are taken really into account. This is pre-modern, completely pre-modern. This is the start of the formation of the modern state. So in Spain, you have Philip II asking to form what is called the Relations of Philip II, in which all the town councils had to answer several questions, and one of them was about antiquities. So why in this questionnaire, why people were asked about antiquities, in addition to number of inhabitants in this place and you know, mountains that your place has, how people live. One of the questions was about antiquities. In Spain, this is Philip II. We are talking here about an empire at that time. In the opposite empire at that time, we have England, okay, with Henry VIII and William Camden, for example. So we have this book, Britannia, in which, again, antiquities are taken into account. Why? Why are antiquities being taken into account in these pre-national books? There are many ways in which this can be explained, and the importance of antiquities is a way for the monarchy to have this claim of the past. So the importance is not the Bible. We were here, and it is not Christianity. We have all these monuments. This is us. So it is a fight against the power of the church. And antiquities are being used in this way. So, in fact, the importance of antiquities started in Italy, okay? But then, so the process is, it starts in Italy, and in Italy, the importance is monuments and coins, numismatics, coins, and epigraphy. That model then moves, for example, to Spain, where the Roman world is very important. What is the archaeology that is done in Spain in the 16th century? The first excavations, the first collections, aristocrats, amassing collections of what? Epigraphy, coins, they do some excavations, and so on. So it's the model of antiquity that has been formed in Italy, moves to other areas of Europe where the Romans had been. However, in Europe, there's a lot of territory where the Romans hadn't been. So then is the model, what is taken is monuments, coins, and epigraphy. If we go to England, they have Romans, but they also have other types of monuments, like Stonehenge, what you can see in this. in this picture here. So we have engravings of a Stonehenge also at this time. If we then move to Sweden, Sweden is a power at that time. And what we find is that they haven't got Romans. What are they giving importance? So again, the king is paying someone to go around and make a catalogue of antiquities. So epigraphy, runic stones, okay? They haven't got coins, not many, as far as I know, but what they are basing is megaliths and runic stones. So they are using these ideas about monuments, coins, and epigraphy, and sculpture sometimes, and the same happens in the colonial world. So at this time, especially not 16th century, although there are some things, 17th and 18th century, what we find is that this model that had started in Italy, that had spread to other areas in Europe and a bit beyond, then it is moved to the colonial world. What do we find people doing? They are always going to the monuments. For example, here we have in Xochicalco in Mexico, all the pyramids. They are all being, documented at that, not all, but some of them are documented at this time. And we have in the two main places of the New World, in the Hispanic in this case, New World, that had been the area where the Mexica, so the Aztec Empire, we find people, looking at antiquities in that area, and the other big province in Spain were the Inca Empire, Peru. So we also find people in Peru going around and doing collections and also using this model of antiquities that had been created in Italy and in other places of Europe, being translated to the new places in other parts of the world. So we find that that model spread. Obviously, we have to find that, okay, they go to all these places, but all these places are going to be criticized because the model is classical antiquity. So everything else will be imperfect. It will be childlike. It will be childish. It's not perfect. Why? Because it's not classical. The top is the classical, and everything else is measured in comparison with the classical. Everything else is incomplete. It is not well done. So it is the idea of the Europeans going with the ideas on the classical, because the classics have a huge importance. And we see this in the development of tourism. So if we go to this period, what is happening mainly among the elites? And we find the grand tour. The grand tour of people or young people in the well-off classes at that time in Europe. And, the power is abandoning Spain. So we have to go especially to England and Scotland and France. They are the two main poles of this grand tour. There are other young people from other places in Europe. But so this acceptance of the classical past as a model to emulate means that a key importance in the education of young men, especially men, more than women, there are few women, but very few women, is this trip to Italy. We find it from the 17th century. It's mainly an 18th century thing, but it is also, it is already there in the 17th century. So we have here this Jean Gaillard complete gentleman, 3-year tour as customary. So this young gentleman had to go to Italy to learn about life, to complete their education. So we have this example of this William Thomas Beckford, for example, who also already goes into the 19th century, English novelist. This must be badly written. So art collector, patron of works of decorative art, critic, travel writer, and sometimes politician. So, and this is the trip that he made down to Italy. So, you know, some of these grand tourists is the grand tour. So tourism comes, the word comes from the grand tour. So they go to Rome. Rome is key in this grand tour. Herculaneum, Stabia, Pompeii. And what this is creating is a whole lot of new businesses. It is creating hotels, it is giving, or it is making, you know, there are some travel guides, flourishing antiquities, market for all these tourists, also an industry of making reproductions or even copies that were sold as actual antiquities. So there's a whole economics around the grand tour. And this, all this is essential for the later development of archaeology. Because without this, archaeology, you know, wouldn't have been important. So at this time, we still don't have professionalization. We start having the first museums that come from private collections, like the British Museum. The British Museum is mid-18th century, and it comes from an antiquities, a collection of antiquities of an aristocrat that gives his whole collection to the state and is being opened. So the first big museums start at this time. So this is Enlightenment, and it is very much connected to all these collections of antiquities that are starting to be given, and the British Museum is a precedent, to the estate. So things are starting to move from private hands to the state. 18th century, it is a precedent, the British Museum, okay? And still we don't have this professionalization of archaeology. Something needs to happen in order for archaeology to be professionalized. But what I'm saying here is that all this traveling is essential for, you know, because otherwise only a few experts would have known. But no, antiquities is very important, and it's very important in every aristocrat in the high, you know, for example, probably Spaniards were not moving around because they didn't have the money to do the grand tour, but they all knew about antiquity. So tourism and all this knowledge about antiquity, going to see the things, is key, because it's keeping all this interest alive, and it is making that a lot of businesses are starting to move around it. So let's then move into the 19th century, and let's see what is happening in the 19th century. And what it happens is that a consequence of the Enlightenment, a logical consequence of the Enlightenment, are the revolutions. And the French Revolution is one, but we have the American Revolution, the Dutch Revolution, they are everywhere, revolutions of this type. But because of the weight of the French thinking, the French Revolution had a huge importance in the imagination of people. And as a background to the American Revolution that had happened more than 10 years earlier, there were all the French writers. Okay, so the French Revolution, 1789, start. It is very complicated, this reign of terror, the directory, the consulate, and then we have the Napoleonic Empire. Right, what happens? I mean, the change is absolutely crucial to understand where we are now. And the change is the creation of the modern state. And so if we have said that in the Middle Ages we had the importance of the church, so the power was in the church, a bit in the monarchies as well, okay? But the church had a huge amount of power. We go to the early modern period, and is the importance of the monarchy, and now we are moving to the importance of the nation. So we have moved from the church to the monarchy to the nation. So the importance, the power is going to be in the nation. And the nation, so to such an extent that, you know, they don't like the king in France, and they just behead him. Bye-bye, king. The importance is the nation. We can live without you. We don't need a monarchy. That would have been unthinkable before. So the importance is the nation now. And with this idea of the nation comes a lot of other ideas. For example, the idea of the universal education and this importance of history. Because if you have a nation, you have to demonstrate that the nation exists. To start with, it wasn't that important because, you know, the French nation existed, the French state existed. So you really didn't need that. Yes, okay. Yeah, I should have put a slide here that I've used in my courses earlier this year with a scheme. So we go from the church to the monarchy to the nation. Okay, so the French state doesn't need that much history. But, you know, in Germany, that they have all these different duchies, and in Germany, they do need some history. And the importance of history starts very strong in Germany, and then with methodology and so on, and then it moves to France. And when I say here universal education, okay, universal, what does it mean universal then? It means mainly men, forget women. No, you know, when you speak in general, you usually speak for men, and women were not that much included in this universal education. The theory was there, the practice was something else. Right, universal education and history, the importance of history. Let's see what Alessandro is writing here. Before church, monarchy, good. I usually do that because I move a lot when I teach, but I have this microphone and I can do that. I'm always writing and so on. Right, so universal education, importance of history, and for example, what we see is that the royal palace that had an important collection of antiquities is then converted into the Louvre. The Louvre is the museum that we all know now, and it is made a museum for the nation, in which all the works of art, of antiquity, and later, I mean, all the works of art are there. There's something else going parallel, but I'm not going to talk about this today. But anyway, the Louvre opens to the public in 1793. So we are moving. I said the British Museum was an exception, but now we are moving to this type of museums that are for the nation and are open to the public. Then also we have the formal teaching in universities. Because of the formation of the modern state that happens here at this time, in these years of the revolution, so what is done is, okay, we need really to organize everything. We need to organize the archives. We need to organize the museums. We need to reorganize the universities. And the universities are reorganized. They existed before, of course, but they go through a full reformation, a full reform at this time. And throughout the 19th century, there will be several reforms. So what is the past of the French Revolution? The French Revolution is obsessed with Roman antiquities. It is not the own past. It is antiquities, Roman antiquities. Freedom, with the ideas of freedom and progress, and there is an interest in the great civilizations. Paris is the inheritor of Rome. And what is created, the type of nationalism that starts then, although the word nationalism is not used, so this is an ideology that is formed without a name. It is, this is what is happening, and only a few years later, 3 decades later, in the 1930s, the word nationalism started. But it's not a word that is being used at the time of the French Revolution. So the basis of nationalism during the French Revolution is the sovereignty of nations. So because you are a nation, you have the right of to be independent. In this case, it was different. The French state, because the French state existed, it was a nation. Okay? So the sovereignty of nations, the belief in all citizens, equal in the eyes of the law, universal education, freedom and progress, and assumed there was the idea of territory and the idea of history. And I say assumed because the French state existed, and therefore they had a territory and they had a history. So they didn't discuss much about it because it was obvious, it was there. So, and this is the type of nationalism, or the ideas of nationalism, that have and still are related to these ideas of democracy, liberal ideology, and so on. In American discourses, in the discourses of the US, these ideas are very much repeated. And this is because the American Revolution was completely based on the French authors, and this is very much American. Freedom, sovereignty of nations, we are all equal, and so on. So some years ago, Bush was talking, and I was, oh, this is fantastic. This is like the French Revolution. All the ideas were in his discourses. These ideas in America, they speak very much still, and in France. Okay? However, things changed with Napoleon. Napoleon started to use these ideas in a different way. First, he invaded, as you know, many parts of Europe, and he started to use antiquities as a weapon of war. One of the things that he did was to empty the museum in the Vatican and take it to the Louvre. So the picture here is when all this work of art were returned to the Vatican. But for some time, most of the Vatican was in the Louvre. Okay? Why? Because if Paris was the inheritor of Rome, So the power of the symbolism of antiquity. You know, all this costs a lot of money, moving antiquities. And it must be very important when people are moving antiquities. It means something. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. They really have to be important in order for all these antiquities to move from one place to the other. Or, for example, when he invaded Egypt, he paid 167 experts to go around and study Egypt. And one of them was Vivant de Nau. Vivant de Nau was an antiquarian, and he was paid to study the antiquities of Egypt. So while some of them studied water, agriculture, whatever, there was someone just doing antiquity. So antiquity was important, and it was important because of this idea. We go back to what I was saying during the Roman Empire, the idea of power. It is a symbolism of power. If you have the antiquities, if you have knowledge of the antiquities, that means that really you have power, and that you deserve being the inheritor of that power. So, and you have here the publication that was made after this trip in Egypt from Vivant de Nau, La description de l'Égypte, the description of Egypt. It's a fantastic book, and it's on the internet now, and with a lot of engravings that you are familiar with, I'm sure. Okay, the creation of the modern state, how did it affect archaeology? It affected it completely. So, among the institutions, we already had learned societies. Learned societies appeared earlier, 17th century, whenever. And Italy, again, is among the earliest. Some of them are in Italy. So that's why it's into brackets there. We have museums. Then we have the heritage administration. Once you have a lot of antiquities, you need to administer them. And then you have, and if you have museums and you have people working in museums, you have to train them. So you need universities. You need experts to know about antiquities, because all this is now at the state level. So it's not aristocrats that are paying, experts. It's now the state, and the state has large museums, and you need experts. And so we have all the evolution that we know nowadays. That's the situation, the structure that we know now is created in the 19th century with museums, heritage administration, and universities. And buttressing all that, sort of at the base of all that, we have legislation, we have journals that start also at this time, and you have the conferences, international conferences, and also foreign schools. Foreign schools here is into brackets because it is very much located in a few places. Okay, so this professionalization of archaeology, as I said, keepers, curators, in universities you start having professors, assistants, administration inspectors of ancient monuments. They start in the 1830s, first in France, then in other places, because what is happening in France has a huge effect on what is happening everywhere in the world, because everybody is looking at France during the 19th century. And then preservation of monuments. So it's not only archaeologists, we also have architects and so on. And I mean, there's the specialization will take some time. You have epigraphists that are philologists and so on. So there's a bit of a mixture during the 19th century. And one of the things that characterized all of them is that they feel they have a sense of patriotism. And they are very explicit about it. They are studying antiquities because they are patriots and because they are doing this for the nation. And you have this, you know, they are very explicit in what they are doing. And nobody thinks that is a bad thing or is out of place. They really think that that's what one has to do. And in the introductions and so on, it is this deep feeling of patriotism in what they are doing. Right, nationalism very soon changes. And you have a different story. So we had that there was the French state. So if I can, that doesn't matter. I will explain this. You had the states and the French state, because it was a state, it was a nation. But very soon, the opposite is going to start happening. If you claim that you are a nation, then you can get independence, or you can amalgamate several independent places or states and create one state. So the first case is that if you claim that you are different, that you are a nation, you deserve independence. This is Greece, for example. Greece was part of the Ottoman Empire. But in the 1820s, I mean, there had been a long story before this of the Philhellenism, of aristocrats, well-off people, intellectuals, thinking that Greece was different and they deserved independence. In the 1920s, that you know that there are a lot of revolutions around Europe. There are many, many revolutions, and one of them is happens in Greece. And it will lead, after many years, to the independence of Greece. There are people going to Greece and claiming, or the own Greeks as well, that they deserve independence, and there are two main reasons for deserving independence. One is antiquity. They were, you know, sort of European civilization started in Greece. How can they be not independent? They are special. They deserve independence. They deserve being a separate state. Another one will be Christianity. They are Christians and they are under Islamic rule. So there are these two reasons, really, why they claim that they deserve being an independent country. This happens, but then we are moving into a different type of nationalism. So if the previous nationalism, civic nationalism, had been about the sovereignty of a nation, the belief in all citizens equals in the eyes of the law, universal education, freedom and progress, from the 1830s, it is going to be about something else. There were precedents with Napoleon, okay, but okay, it's from the 1830s, independence of Greece and independence of Latin America. Most of Latin America got independent at that time with this type of discourses. So if you are a nation, you deserve independence, and your nation is going to, there are certain things that you have to have for people to believe that you are a nation. You need to have a territory. If you don't have a territory, you don't have a nation. You need a history. So history starts to be absolutely essential from now on. It was important before, but from the 1830s, it is essential, because you really need to study your nation. You really need to give the past roots to your nation. You need language, although not always. And race, at that time, in the 19th century, people are talking about race, not always, but mainly. And then, you know, later on, today we don't talk about race, but we talk about culture, which is, you know, the modern way of meaning what they were meaning about race. Although obviously in the 19th century they had also this physical aspect to it. And then religion. So whereas in the first type of nationalism you could relate that to democracy, to liberal ideology, in this second type of nationalism you can have a dictatorship that is national. It is not linked to what it has disappeared from here is the belief in all citizens that are equal in the eyes of the law. That has disappeared, because the importance now is history, territory, language, and so on. And universal education is not that important, although they continue having, because education is a way of controlling people. And the idea of freedom and progress is not necessary there. So the new type of nationalism can have all those previous elements, but not necessarily so. So nationalism has changed into a different type of ideology. Okay? So there are two meanings of nationalism. The first one that is still very much in the lips of Americans, North Americans, and French people. And the other one, that is the one that most people are using nowadays, which is this one. Even Americans and French, when otherwise they wouldn't vote to the National Front. Okay. So you have this type of nationalism. How does it affect archaeology? The start of Romanticism, the first Romanticism in the 1830s, not the one that develops also later on. What we are seeing is that from the moment that that is about your own history, your own language, your own territory, classical antiquities continue to be important. They don't disappear, but this is one discourse. And what you go is to your own antiquities. And your own antiquities is prehistory, medieval history in Europe, okay? Prehistory and medieval history. So the importance of the study of prehistory, first of medieval period and then of prehistory, because we go back in time, it starts to be being essential. So it doesn't mean, you know, you saw Stonehenge before, but let's say the state or the possibility of professionalizing prehistoric archaeology or medieval history and the study of medieval monuments start now, because it's when all these things are becoming important. And these so monuments now are starting to be perceived as patriotic witnesses of the national past. This is, you know, you then understand the emerge, and I'm not sure about Italy, but I'm sure that you had something similar of national monuments. Obviously, in Italy, what it affects is the unification of Italy. The unification of Italy wouldn't have been possible without this second type of nationalism. And the unification of Germany wouldn't have been possible without this second type of nationalism. It belongs to that type of ideology, that you are a nation, therefore you deserve independence, or in this case amalgamation of different states, because you are a nation. So what we can see is that this importance of the classics is being substituted, or at least accompanied, by the importance of medieval monuments and also prehistoric monuments, that before, you know, it existed, but it hadn't been that important. So what we are moving here is from the Louvre, which is a museum of classical antiquity, to the possibility of opening another museum, like in Paris, the Musée des Antiquités Nationales, which is the museum for prehistory. Okay, and so where prehistory is placed. Right. What is happening in tourism, and what is the effect of archaeological tourism? So what we go is from just having these aristocrats coming to Italy, looking at all the classical antiquities and so on, to because of the development of the means of traveling starts to be cheaper. So industrial revolution means that the means of transport starts being much cheaper, and therefore people can move. And with the development of railways, so the development of railways, for example, has two clear effects in archaeology. One is that because of the construction of the railways, it starts a lot of monuments, or a lot of archaeological sites appear, and also, I mean, related to this also, in a way, if you have the train lines and where the archaeological sites are, or the roads and where the known archaeological sites, there's always a relationship. Why? Because, you know, the archaeologists just go there on the train, go around, look at the things around, and go back home. So it also affects completely our knowledge of what is out there. But in terms of tourism, it opens the possibility of people who would have never done this before, people of the middle classes, and even of the working classes. It starts in the 19th century, moving around, going to see archaeological sites. So this was only possible for the higher elite before. In the 18th century, it was extremely expensive. Now, things get cheaper, and people start moving and going to visit. So this idea that knowledge gives you, prepares you for life, starts being used for people of the middle classes and even some of the working classes. So in fact, it's not true. It can't be a train in Westminster Abbey. Impossible. I think this is just a joke in a newspaper and so on. And I think that's what it means, two fantasies. It's not true. So people, is this idea, this was published in 1845, this idea is, oh, there are too many people visiting Westminster Abbey now, and even a train is going around inside. It's not, I don't think it was true. I mean, I don't know, I have to double check this, but I don't think that you could put a train, even if it's small, inside Westminster Abbey. But there's sort of the first idea that the massification of tourists, there's too many people. I go to see Westminster Abbey and it's full of people. 1845. And this is 1878, the little express traction engine at the Stonehenge. So people started to go to Stonehenge in all these machines. There's an excursion of a nearby village. It took hours to arrive to Stonehenge because the thing was going really, really slowly, but they arrived. You know, the first motorcycles in the Stonehenge, 900s. And here we have, what was that, in 1901. I mean, and I don't think that I've brought them, but what it also meant is that all these new religions, the Druids, start meeting in the Stonehenge, these new Druids. They start meeting in the Stonehenge, and there are photographs in 1905. So what we see is that the appropriation of antiquities may be also done in different ways, in uncontrolled ways for archaeologists. But this is another story, so that's why I think I didn't put it here. But this traveling around is also taking Europeans to other places. Still, we are talking about the elite here, going to places beyond Europe. So we have here Amelia Edwards. Amelia Edwards, 1831 to 1892. She was a person who inherited a large fortune. She was a woman who inherited a large fortune and loved Egypt. And she started to go around Egypt. She did several trips to Egypt and wrote books about the antiquities in Egypt. But she also, so this tourism then had direct effects in archaeology. So we have, she was the founder of the Egypt Exploration Fund, which is sort of then it transformed itself into a society, and it's a society that promotes a lot of archaeology in Egypt. And perhaps even more important, she funded the chair, the Egyptian chair in University College London, the chair that was then occupied by Flinders Petrie. So Flinders Petrie was paid by the money or the fund of Amelia Edwards. So we have the start of official Egyptology being taught in London thanks to archaeological tourism. So archaeological tourism, again, if we studied this, is created a lot of businesses. Yeah? Okay. I thought you wanted me to talk for 2 hours, but okay, 5 minutes. So you have all these all these businesses around it and so on. So what we are seeing is that there's these changes in 19th century tourism from what we had seen before. So we had the entrance of the middle classes that hadn't been in the 18th century. They couldn't afford it. It was too expensive to move around. Then shorter and more affordable trips, just going to see Stonehenge, that is a few miles or kilometers down the road. Then new businesses like the tourist companies. So we have Thomas Cook in the 1840s, they started. The tourist guidebooks, Baedeker, Murray, the Touring Club. And don't think that professional archaeologists were not into this, because some of the professional archaeologists were asked to do the traveling guides. For example, for Egypt, I've forgotten now the name of the German professor who wrote this guide to Egypt. So you have these two types of tourism. Still, that for for aristocrats or people well-off people, and the one that is more sort of home. We have some of the first guides, some created, for example, for the 1851 exhibition in London, where there were some displays of prehistory and other things, the guides and so on. So what we have is the popularization of archaeology throughout diverse methods, these universal exhibitions that I've just mentioned very briefly, activities, hiking, archaeological photographic societies, and then the appearance of new techniques applied for the dissemination of archaeological knowledge, such as photography, postcards, and stamps. And this could take me 1 more hour explaining all this. But, so my questions were, what is the relationship between archaeology and tourism throughout modern history? I think that, I mean, there are relationships. They are not two separate worlds. One of the clearest ideas has been this of Amelia Edwards, for example, and the creation of an archaeological chair. But we could really start, pulling out many information and making a connection there. There is a connection. They are not two separate worlds. They are, they develop separately, but the connections are continuous. Is there a connection between nationalism and archaeological tourism? I haven't developed this, but yes, there is. Why people are interested in Stonehenge? Why some people in one village go to see Stonehenge? Because it is important, it's sort of, they are proud of Stonehenge. Otherwise, they would go to another place. They are giving importance to this. And if they are giving importance, it's because it is important for them. It means something. Okay? Is there a connection between colonialism and archaeological tourism? I think I've answered to this much better. Yes, there is a connection. Everything is inferior if you connect it to your model. Like we saw the pyramids in Mexico and Peru. And what I haven't gone into is the last bit, is the connection between archaeological tourism and globalization and so on. And I will be talking about this perhaps next year. Okay, thank you.
Credo che Margarita capisce perfettamente l'italiano e quindi possiamo fare, anche se vogliamo, la discussione in italiano. Io, come sapete, sono una fan di tutti questi temi, quindi mi è piaciuto tantissimo, ho imparato tanto, molte cose diciamo le sappiamo, no? È la rivoluzione francese, questo e l'altro, però realmente capirne le basi e alcuni collegamenti che ci ha fatto, io che dovrei saperle, non le sapevo queste cose, e quindi spero che anche voi avete apprezzato e avete imparato tanto. Io sono particolarmente contenta anche del tema che lei ha affrontato, il rapporto tra storia, storiografia, nazionalismo, colonialismo, eccetera, archeologia e turismo, e sono particolarmente contenta che è venuta oggi a sentire, a partecipare di questo evento la professoressa Toniolo. Credo che per molti anni, fino a 10 anni fa, nella nostra università purtroppo ancora il mondo del turismo, l'accademia, i docenti universitari lo hanno un po' disprezzato, è un mercantilismo dell'arte, dell'archeologia, è da solo soldi, eccetera. Però abbiamo capito che nel passato l'archeologia si è sviluppata grazie al turismo, è stato il turismo quello che ha fatto scoprire nuovi luoghi, andare a nuovi luoghi, permettere l'interesse per questo e che i stati finanziassero l'arrivo di studiosi. Credo che magari l'anno prossimo, quando verrà a spiegarci la seconda parte, questo sta acquistando un nuovo valore in un momento in cui il turismo non solo è di massa, come lì ci ha mostrato il trenino, ma nei nostri giorni, non so come si chiamerebbe, è di apocalisse praticamente il turismo, nel senso che grazie ai voli low cost e l'abbassamento un po' dei prezzi di tutto, adesso il turismo sta diventando in alcune aree di Europa, e ci sono degli studi della Comunità Europea che dicono questo sarà nei prossimi anni la prima economia mondiale dell'Europa, e acquistando altri mercati, il mercato cinese, il mercato orientale in generale, il mercato americano. Quindi se vogliamo anche sopravvivere come studiosi, se vogliamo applicare le nostre conoscenze di archeologi a qualcosa che riesca a essere sostenibile e a controllarlo anche, non è che noi dobbiamo vendere l'archeologia semplicemente perché dà soldi, dobbiamo anche proteggerla, e per proteggerla il meglio è conoscere quel mondo e utilizzarlo nel miglior modo possibile. Credo che, ricordatevelo, dico sempre, tutti siamo archeologi, tutti vorremmo fare i professori di università, magari io mi sono già stufata, forse no, vedremo, però una delle strade importanti che voi potete prendere in futuro è proprio questo tipo di attività. Come avvicinare, come fare sostenibile la nostra attività archeologica, come farla comprendere, come faremo a comprendere il mondo medievale ai cinesi, come faremo che siano interessati alle chiese, le cattedrali, eccetera. Cioè, sono tutti una serie di mondi che bisogna entrare, bisogna sviluppare, e voi siete la generazione che, grazie alle vostre conoscenze tecniche e al mondo in cui vivete, siete più adatte a sviluppare. Quindi per questo grazie, passioning and awesome, e tutti gli aggettivi che in inglese vuoi darli. Ci sono delle domande? Avete delle domande da fare su quello che lei ha detto? Dici, forte e chiaro. Sì, questo l'ha già spiegato all'inizio, so che tu sei arrivato in ritardo, però adesso... sí, en época romana existía el turismo como lo entendemos hoy y no solo un interés por el pasado, o sí había un interés por el pasado.
No, what I said, yeah, I mean, there was an interest in the past and there were people moving around. I mean, can we call that tourism? Okay, it could be a precedent of tourism, but there were very few people moving around, and the idea of business that it comes together with tourism is probably not there still, because you need a certain amount of people to start calling it really tourism, but it's obviously a precedent, because you have a sort of tourist guides as, you know, sort of things that people interested in these antiquities can read, and there were people moving, but not at the scale that even happened later on in the 18th century. It is a precedent, and I think it's probably connected, this idea of traveling in order to get knowledge in antiquity, that then is also taken later on in the early modern period, because all the ideas in antiquity are essential for what is later on happening in the early modern period in Europe. But really, you know, again, it depends how you define tourism. It can go in or not, but you know, yeah, it's not.
Dipende molto di quello che intendi per turismo. In realtà esiste un interesse per il passato, come ha detto, nel mondo greco e nel mondo romano. A me mi è sembrato molto interessante quella e anche dal punto di vista del turismo attuale, quella riflessione, adesso non mi ricordo se era di Plinio o di chi era, che dice andiamo in quella epoca, andiamo a vedere posti lontani perché fa più figo, diciamo, perché è più interessante, e invece non vediamo quello che a volte abbiamo nella nostra propria città. I cittadini di una città, gli abitanti di un territorio vanno volentieri a Barcellona, magari vanno a Ravenna, a Roma, in Cina, a Tokyo, però senza rendersi conto che altra gente viene alla nostra città a vedere, lo ignoriamo. Questa è una cosa fondamentale, secondo me, il turismo di prossimità, potenziare che la gente di una propria città, di un proprio territorio viaggi, frequenti e visiti i propri luoghi. Però turismo, diciamo, come business, eccetera, come hai visto, no, non c'era. Professoressa Toniolo, che non arriva al microfono, quindi puoi venire qua.
No, molto interessante, grazie. Credo anche che abbia, come tu hai fatto capire, molte diverse sfaccettature, soprattutto per quanto riguarda, credo, proprio il nostro paese e l'Italia, perché noi abbiamo dei momenti molto particolari che altri paesi non hanno, non nel senso di nazione, ma come conservatori dell'antichità. E quindi, per esempio, già la Roma di Sisto IV già a chiara coscienza fa fare dallo stesso Raffaello le riprese, i disegni dal Pantheon in maniera archeologica. Quindi è un paese particolare in questo, e nello stesso tempo dopo invece tarda proprio perché tarda ad essere nazione, a, come dire, entrare in quella diatriba che è quella che riguarda, io dico sempre a lezione, la nascita del termine romanico è viziata dai nazionalismi, per cui romanico francese, romanico, siamo stati noi i primi ad avere le cattedrali, così per il gotico, immaginano dei concetti che non c'erano in età medievale. Quindi è un argomento affascinante e con tanti aspetti. Volevo chiederti se io credo ci sia anche una relazione con lo sviluppo economico. Con lo sviluppo economico. Per esempio, una cosa molto bella, no, è che nel Medioevo, nelle strade del pellegrinaggio, dove noi sappiamo c'è la guida del pellegrinaggio, a un certo punto la Santa Fede di Conch viene rubata la reliquia da un luogo e portata a Conch. Perché viene rubata e portata? Perché già, e questo abbiamo dei testi che lo dicono, si sentiva che era conveniente avere una reliquia importante. Perché? Perché avrebbe chiamato pellegrini, noi qua al Santo, Sant'Antonio, a una fonte economica. Quindi a volte credo che oltre ai nazionalismi e oltre alle religioni ci siano anche già presto delle ragioni economiche. Volevo chiederti se nei tuoi studi hai rintracciato anche queste, anche oggi sono i paesi emergenti economicamente che sono quelli con più alto numero di turismo che è arrivato. C'è una statistica del 2013-2014 che mostra se il paese sta bene, no? Investe, ma anche viaggia. Allora non so se questo è, come dire, documentabile, cioè se esiste per esempio un miglioramento dei paesi in quel momento in cui vengono anche visitati.
No, I'm not sure whether I have fully
He
understood
preguntado
this.
dos cosas fundamentalmente. El uno, y eso es verdad, yo también lo he pensado cuando estaban haciendo, como en la época medieval el turismo, y es una cosa que podrías desarrollar, o una tesis o lo que sea, como el turismo medieval es muy interesante, cómo se mueve por las reliquias y tal, pero que ya en las fuentes antiguas, y eso también lo explico a mis estudiantes, es el poder económico.
But you can't, but yeah, but you can't.
Y luego la segunda pregunta es...
So I will ask you if you have some documents about this after the Middle Ages, in the period
My idea is not to do original research for this. It's just to try to do an overview, and I've been reading or gathering information about the Middle Ages, but I wouldn't call that tourism.
Pero luego
But,
en la época sucesiva, en la época nacionalista, que es lo que ella quiere saber, en la época nacionalista, siglo XVIII, siglo XIX, ¿existe también el impacto económico del turismo, además del Grand Tour y del estudio de los monumentos? ¿Existe ya un interés económico o es algo puramente moderno?
What we see in the 19th century is the start of private businesses dealing with tourism, like Thomas Cook. Thomas Cook starts with the idea of creating tours for people, for especially working classes, middle classes, in order for them not to drink alcohol. So it's a religious idea. He wants people to have something to do that is just not go to the pub. And he starts creating this. But anyway, this is so successful that he creates a company. So there's a huge amount of businesses going around tourism in terms of the traveling agencies, the guides, so printing, all these printers that are printing the traveling guides. These also are sort of businesses around. Then there is the importance of hotels and restaurants and so on. So there's a huge amount of businesses emerging, but you know, the economic importance won't be as much as what we have nowadays. Nowadays is big, is business, and it has to do. It is related with the increase in leisure time, and flights. That has also, so the mass tourism, and mass tourism started in the 70s, and it is now, I mean, what is the Chinese government doing now? The Chinese government is starting to give people more holidays so that they can, more holiday days, so that they can go around, because they have realized that tourism is a huge business. But in terms of what is happening in the medieval period, I wouldn't call that tourism. They are pilgrimages that, yes, have an economic impact, and yes, during the medieval period and later on, there's all these movements of reliquias, I've forgotten the name in English now, going around and so on. Yeah, but no, not really. The language of antiquity was so powerful that it was adopted by most of the nationalist groups. Yes, in Latin America, they also made use of the antiquities, even if then there was a problem in America when racism started to be strong from the 1840s, then that was a problem. Because how could then treat these antiquities that were, you know, so strange and coming from the Indians, and you know, so they didn't really know what to do, and they then used other types of pasts. So if the first museums in America, in Hispanic America, had been formed in the 1820s and 1830s, they were closed, and they only were reopened in the 1870s. and 1880s, when Romanticism came back again in a different way, and there was a difference in the discourse, and they reopened again. What is happening in ISIS is completely new, and this has been realizing, and I think probably is related to all these ideas of post-colonialism and Edward Said and so on, and is sort of realizing that antiquity has been used as an argument against everything that was exotic, and is a reaction against this discourse and the destruction of antiquities. They don't want to have any of that. All those antiquities are for foreigners, and it's not for us. We are Muslims, and we should, so it's going back to the Bible, going back to the Quran. It's completely new, that reaction.
There hasn't been any voluntary destruction.
As
Several mosques in Greece after their
okay, right, that's a different thing, okay. Yes, of course they have been, but this is because of religious reasons, and so the destruction of mosques and the destruction. So what every nation decides what pasts they want it to be the national past, and that is highlighted. The money goes to that period or that type of monument, and the other ones are erased. So, for example, until very recently, it was normal in Spain that if you did an excavation, all these medieval remains out, especially if they were Islamic, out. We are not interested in this. You then went into the classical period. Okay, you studied the classical period.